Hi everyone, it's Melissa, and today I am sharing what I read in December of 2023. I'm going to go over these in the order in which I read them. So we're starting with something I read on audiobook. I read 2 books on audio in December, and I've neglected to write down the narrators for both, so I will make sure that they are in the description box. So the first book is Peyakow by Darrel J. McLeod. This is a memoir. The author is Cree. His first memoir was Mackesy, and that was memoir of his childhood into adulthood, very much about his family and his identity as an Indigenous person and generational trauma. This is basically a follow-up to that memoir. This deals more with his early adulthood and the start of his career and the development of his career. There's a bit in here about his family as well, but I found this memoir focused quite heavily on the work that he's done. I was interested by inside details about negotiations and about working with or alongside government on different Indigenous issues. And I thought hearing that inside perspective was very interesting. However, I was a bit underwhelmed with the memoir given how much I enjoyed Mackesy. A lot of this memoir to me came across as bragging about the work that he'd done. Maybe bragging is too strong of a word here, but it felt like I am going to detail all of the important work that I've done, all of the ways I have really tried to do my best work, and then all of the ways that there was pushback on that, but without much dissection on that or reflection on that. It just came across very one note to me, and I think he tried to detail too much of that work. And obviously he's done a lot of work and he's probably very proud of a lot of that work, but it doesn't necessarily make for an interesting memoir when you're trying to detail everything. It made it quite redundant and it dragged a bit. So I didn't necessarily dislike the memoir, but in comparison to the first one, I just think this one wasn't up to that standard. The next thing that I read in December were the next 2 volumes, number 5 and 6, of the Saga comics by Brian K. Vaughan, illustrated by Fiona Staples. I gave both of these volumes 5 stars. I really enjoyed them. Because this is partway through the series, I don't really want to share too much, so I'll just say that the series as a whole is about this couple who are on opposite sides or come from opposite sides of this intergalactic war. One of them is from the planet that is being oppressed, and the other is from the planet that is the oppressor. They end up falling in love, and they have a child, and the child's existence is a problem in this galaxy. This series is very political and very weird and imaginative and grotesque and graphic and crude. And at the same time, it's very interesting and rich and surprising and compelling. And the illustrations are excellent. I just think that the art style complements the story so well. So that's all I can really say about Saga, but it was probably my favorite thing I read in the month. I really enjoyed it. The next book I read is The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. This is a children's book, and I mean, there's hardly any words in it, so I can't really say much. It's about a boy and him talking with these animals and the wisdom they impart to him. I did not like this book. I was so disappointed. It looked so charming. It was giving me really strong Winnie the Pooh vibes, which I love that book. I love Winnie the Pooh, but this ain't it. This is not Winnie the Pooh. I found the book quite, is trite the right word? I think trite might be the right word. This book is basically a list of platitudes that are meant to be deep. And I know some people would say, but it's a children's book. And yes, it is, but I have read a lot of children's books, including picture books, that do really say something meaningful, and I don't think that this did. So unfortunately, I didn't like this. I thought I would love it, but it just wasn't for me. The next book that I read was on audiobook. I'll make sure the narrator's below. It is Last Christmas at Ballyclare by Emily Bell. I know now is not the time that anyone wants to be reading a Christmas book, but maybe put it on your list for next Christmas. I really liked this. It was quite charming and sweet without being like sickeningly sweet. It's set in Ireland. It follows a mother and her 2 adult daughters. They're in their roughly mid to late 20s. The daughters are coming home for Christmas, and this might be the last Christmas in this home, what was their childhood home. There are structural issues with the house that mean that the mother simply can't afford to fix the house anymore. So they're gathered around for the last Christmas here. This is marketed as a romance, and the mother and both daughters, there are romantic elements. There are love interests for all 3, and we do get shifting points of view for all 3 characters. For me, the family element and the mother-daughter relationships and the sister relationship were more the centerpiece of this book. I could have actually done without the romance. I think it was probably the weakest part of the entire book. Maybe that's because there were 3 points of view, and so we didn't get a lot of time with any one person to really develop that romance. And so those romances all seemed maybe not as important as the relationship between the family members. So I could have done without the romance, and this would have been a lovely story of family and sticking together through hardship. And I thought it was quite charming. I gave it 4 stars, and I think it's a nice wintry Christmassy type of read. The next book that I read is one I've been meaning to get to for ages, and that's Wicked by Gregory Maguire. I think most people are familiar with this. I hadn't seen the musical, so I didn't really know anything about the story at all. And from what I have heard from other people, the tones of each are so different and the focal points of each are so different that they might as well be 2 completely different things. So this is a retelling, I guess, an origin story for the Wicked Witch of the West in this book, given the name Elphaba. We're already familiar with the world of Oz in some way, shape, or form, and this expands on that really beautifully. I think the world building is one of the things I really strongly appreciated in this. It has a map, which if you put a map in your book, it does a lot for me. It does a lot. It really, I don't know, there's something about seeing a map like in print on paper that makes a world just feel real. It makes it feel like cartographers have actually like mapped this land. So I really appreciated that. I was not prepared for the amount of politics in this book. I think that was a really interesting touch, but of course, if you're going to flesh out an entire world, of course, politics are going to be involved. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in here about like women and the position of women and like gender roles. There's stuff in here about like ideology and like very rigid ideology and terrorism and religion. And that was all a really interesting backdrop to the story of this character, the world that she emerges from. Elphaba, of course, is famously born with green skin, and that was a really interesting part of her character development, but not in the ways that I would have expected. I think it would be really interesting to hear someone's take on this book who actually has a disability or visible difference. I think there's a lot in here about disability and visible difference that could be dissected and explored. I started this book in October, and then it kind of got set aside for other reading projects in October and November, and so I read it very slowly over the course of 3 months, and I think that did a disservice to the book, where I would have been more engaged in the politics in this book if I had focused on it without reading other things and setting it aside and picking it back up again. So this is one that I am definitely going to reread in the future, and the farther I'm removed from the book, the more it grows on me. When I finished reading it, I gave it a 4-star, and I think if I read it again in the future, it might grow to a 5. I just think there's a lot to unpack, and this would make a great like book club type of book. I would have loved to discuss this with someone. And actually I did want to mention Lena Norms. I will link her channel below. If you somehow don't follow her, you should. She's awesome. But she has talked about Wicked in passing on her channel many times. She wrote her dissertation on it. And so for several years, she keeps mentioning, oh, one day I'll do a video on Wicked. One day I'll do a video on Wicked. And this year she has committed to doing probably a series of videos on Wicked with the announce of the film release and whatnot. Now seems the opportune time to do that. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing Lena's thoughts on this book. The last thing that I read, and we're leaving on a bit of a disappointment, unfortunately, and that's the first in the Sandman comic series. This is Preludes and Nocturnes. This is by Neil Gaiman. This is a much beloved comic series, but I was just disappointed in it. And I gave it a 4-star when I finished, but I think in retrospect it's probably a 3. I think I was probably being a little generous because I wanted to like it more than I did, and there were elements that I did like about it, but I think on reflection it's probably more like a 3. It's probably more of a middle of the road. So the premise of the story is that this kind of like culty group of people try to capture death, but they end up mistakenly summoning and capturing Sleep, or he's sometimes called the Sandman, or Dream. That leads to a lot of weird things happening around sleep and around dreaming, sleep disorders, and the book kind of follows a few different little stories about what that does to people who don't wake up from sleep, people who can't sleep, how it affects people's dreams and nightmares. And it also follows the story of Dream himself and how he breaks free and tries to set things to right and regain his kingdom of the dream world, essentially. I really enjoyed the mythology around this. I think there were a lot of cool bits. I think the part where he goes to hell to get one of his like tools or artifacts back was pretty interesting. There were other little stories that I thought were really cool, but then there were other stories where I just kind of didn't see the point of that particular story. But the biggest downfall was the art style. I just did not like the art style at all. The artwork is like half the enjoyment of, probably more than half of the enjoyment of a comic or graphic novel. And I'm bummed because I thought I would really, really love it. Those are the things that I read in December. If you have any thoughts about any of these books, please leave a comment below. I'd love to have a chat with you. And as always, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll chat soon. Take care.